All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from across the world. My name is Douglas Dubois-Card Sebamala, a multimedia advocacy artist, producer, and journalist from Uganda, currently based in Washington, D.C. Thank you all for joining us today for our conversation on gender norms with women, whose creative practices and artistic visionary is breaking barriers and stereotypes. And a massive thank you to the World Bank for making this platform possible for women and youth, for us to be present, to be seen, and to be heard, because representation of women and youth is very important in the decision-making process for development in areas that affect us directly. On that note, let me welcome Marina Galvani, Senior Program Manager and Art Curator at the World Bank. Marina?
Thank you, Douglas, and welcome everybody, especially to you and our colleague and the artists who are forming this beautiful panel today. Yes, this is a special moment, as Douglas was saying, because we are inviting to the table artists and youth and women to talk together about the future of the continent. The idea is that artists are the best ambassadors of the hopes and challenges of communities. They can talk the emotional language in a universal way, if you want, that can touch the heart and the emotional intelligence of many different people. This talk is presenting, if you want, women in a positive light as trendsetters, as groundbreakers, as breadwinners, as innovators. And I'm saying that in the sense that we had previous talks in which we were looking at the challenges faced by women in the rural context, in the urban context, as survivors of gender-based violence or discrimination, etc., etc. So this talk is different in the sense that this reality exists, but they are presented by the artists in a different form, and they are elevated, if you want, to a model, to a symbol for a community and for other women. So I think it's a wonderful lesson they are imparting to us, and this is part of the hope of this exhibition, We Are Africa, the Power Women of Youth, to build bridges and to help people to think differently about themselves and about this wonderful continent. So Douglas, I would like for you to introduce our wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. We live in a world today where each generation has women rising up, very strong women, powerful women, to challenge narratives and have gender discourse and create real positive change in different areas. And on our panel today, we have such women. We have Kresiah Mukwazhi, a multimedia artist from Zimbabwe, whose work engages audiovisual work and performance. And her latest work, Mukando, is currently on exhibition, and we are going to have a look at that. Mia Collis, who is currently based out of Nairobi, is an independent photographer, and she is joined by her collaborator, Cynara Vetch. For their work, she shapes the city, which we're also going to see later on. But before we get into an in-depth conversation with the artists about their work and how they impact gender and start conversations on issues that are relevant to women, let us meet Alicia S. Hammond in Washington, D.C. Alicia is the lead specialist, is a gender specialist and lead on innovation and technology with the gender group at the World Bank. She is a researcher and has done analysis across gender equality issues, including human endowments, economic opportunities, voice, and agency. Alicia also joined the World Bank from the Women and Public Policy program at Harvard Kennedy School, where she managed strategic outreach initiatives and translated experimental gender equality research for non-academic audiences. Welcome, Alicia.
Thank you so much, Douglas. It's really a pleasure to be here today. So as Douglas mentioned, I focus on innovation and technology at the World Bank, but I'm really excited to talk about art today. And of course, very excited to hear more from these incredible artists as we dig deeper into their work. For me, this is personal. I love the creative arts. I grew up as a musical theater kid in Jamaica and as a modern dancer. And so I really appreciate the role that creatives have among us in terms of reflecting what we see back to us, but also challenging us and inviting us to imagine a better society. So today's event is a complex one, exploring women as innovators, trendsetters, and essentially looking at the intersection of gender equality, social norms, art, and really thinking through how we craft a more inclusive future. So I'll talk about three things today. One is the bank's approach to gender equality more broadly, giving a few highlights on the institution's priorities in the Africa region in particular. And third, a pivot to innovation. So really talking through what gendered innovation looks like at the bank, but also, exploring how we could push the envelope to explore art into that framework. Next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. So, in terms of how we approach gender at the bank, it's really centered around four main areas. And these are selected based on a thorough review of evidence on gender equality, as well as a series of consultations around the world with civil society, academia, the private sector, and governments. And so the first area is really what we talk about as human endowment. So making sure individuals are equally able to access education, health, and social protection. The second is about closing gaps in terms of jobs, really facilitating women's access to work and addressing other issues like occupational sex segregation, which keeps women or leaves women out of higher paying sectors, as well as issues like care services and safe transportation that helps to facilitate access to work. The third is around assets, productive assets like land, housing, finance, and technology. And the fourth is really about addressing gender-based violence, norms around masculinity, and focusing on issues like women's leadership and agency. And so this is a framework for what we do, but of course, context matters. A one-size-fits solution never doesn't work for everyone, of course. And so this approach allows regions and countries to really adapt this framework to prioritize what is important and relevant for them. Next slide, please. So in terms of keeping this in mind, the Africa region has its own priorities on gender equality, like I mentioned. And so the first is around reproductive health and maternal mortality and demographics. And so even though we've seen maternal deaths decrease by about 40%, the rates are quite high, and in the Africa region account for almost 70% of maternal deaths. So this is an important area of focus. The second prioritizes gaps in schooling. So looking at, the primary level where we've seen good progress in enrollment, but we still see some larger gaps in West African countries, and especially those across the Sahel, as well as those in fragile and conflict-affected settings. And at the secondary level, progress has been slower due to issues that affect girls in particular, for example, child marriage, early childbearing, as well as risks of gender-based violence, among others. The third is around agricultural productivity. So we see as women farmers face lower access to productive inputs like land, labor, fertilizer, among others, and often have lower return to these inputs. And then just quickly, the other two are around entrepreneurship. And so I think what's interesting is women in the Africa region are more likely to be working than women in any other region, and they're also more likely to be entrepreneurs. At the same time, we see that there's still differences in terms of, being able to access financing, networks, and a variety of skills. So we have some work there to do, of course. And then lastly, looking at gender issues in fragile and conflict-affected settings. So this is to give you a broad overview, but how do we link this all to innovation? So next slide, please, Sarah. So of course, innovation is really about a new way of doing things. It's about crafting a new perspective. And so when it comes to gender equality and innovation in the Africa region, one of those areas is around pushing the boundaries on social norms. And so we have a group called the Gender Innovation Lab, focused on the Africa region. And what they do is really use innovative research and policy to really start to shift norms and to frame a new vision of masculinity in one of those areas. And, just to highlight a couple of examples of their work, because I think as we move towards women's empowerment, we can't do this in a silo. We have to engage men as well. And so one example is from Rwanda, where there was a couples intervention that addressed a range of issues like gender and power, looking at fatherhood and caregiving, as well as decision-making. And this helped to reduce violence and improve women's decision-making in the household. And, there's a second more complex example that I wanted to share, and that one is from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And this aimed to address unequal power imbalances in the household and gender hierarchies, essentially. And so what they did was to create a group only for men where they discussed gender roles, norms, and power. And what they found was interesting. The quality of the couple's relationship improved. Men participated more in the housework, but at the same time, there was still some resistance to gender hierarchy and power. And so fundamentally, men were not really willing to give up their power. And so I think that's food for thought in terms of, taking a more complex approach to how we address women's empowerment in the future going forward. The second area I want to talk about quickly is just about, technology as we think about the future and innovation. I think that's something that comes to mind, and this is what I work on in particular. And of course, the pandemic has accelerated that transition for all of us. But, as we work through this process, we have to think about who is constructing this future and whose vision are we laying out. And so, this is one area where we also see social norms and biases that often limit the kinds of people or the range of people who co-create these solutions of the future. And so as we do this, I think it's important to raise up local solutions to local problems, but also making sure that we have women, participating equally in this process. And so just quickly to share one example that I'm excited about, it's called the African Centers for Excellence. And what they're doing is building on talent, or increasing talent for the future in the Africa region through scholarships focused on STEM, as well as applied sciences and agriculture, health, and other fields. And they're really prioritizing women in this area and their participation. And essentially that creates a space for women to be role models and start to equally participate in blazing this trail and co-creating these solutions of the future. So I think it's a very exciting example. But then thirdly, what does this have to do with art? Well, I think, as we think about innovation, technology is what comes to mind, but it's not only about tech. I think we need art because we need everyone. We need the engineers, we need the technologists, we need the artists, we need the novelists. And so I think art has always been a critical tool in terms of crafting our narrative and imagination of the future. And I think it's going to be important to build a stronger link between artists and the development community going forward. And I think what art can help us do is move from the collective to the personal, because, as we do this big global policy work, I think we also have to hold space for complexity and multidimensionality of individuals, their narratives, and their stories. And I think, this is what our three speakers here do today, Kresiah, Mia, and Cynara. They center women in their work, many of whom are negotiating access to power in their own complex ways, and many of whom we often think of as marginalized, but they're very careful never to frame them in a one-dimensional light. And it's always, always about dignity. And so I think it's really important, that we never lose sight of that. And I think that's why I'm very excited to kind of dig deeper into their work today. So thank you so much for the invitation, and over to you, Douglas.
Thank you, Alicia. Just like you, I'm really thrilled to be in the presence of such amazing work by incredible artists. I want to acknowledge that being a man, I come into this space aware of what the men in our societies and the patriarchy have done in the generation of subjugation and discrimination and marginalization of women. And I'm really, really honored by the work that Kresiah and Mia and Cynara are doing. And so I'm going to kickstart off with you, Kresiah. Looking at your work, there is such a power in the visual. You're both a multimedia artist who also does performance in your work. I want to kickstart right away with Mukando. The exhibition has mixed media. You have colorful presentations in the work, in the fabric, in the texture. What inspired Mukando? And how did you initialize the process to get to the subjects that you're talking about in the work? How was that process creating Mukando for you? And what is it about?
Thank you so much, Douglas. And thank you everyone for having me. Mukando in my language means throw in or to say a financial saving account or group. And my focus was obviously the women that I had been in the community in my country, which is also one of the poorest suburbs of my country. And my work explores the female condition on different layers financially, physically, in terms of women like sex workers or women in vulnerable working sectors or informal working sectors are exposed to. So in this case, I was quite interested in how this community had come about to find a way to empower each other financially. And it is done in such a way that at some point everyone gets a lump sum, and at some
Kresiah is calling us from Zimbabwe, so please forgive any technical difficulties that may arise. Kresiah?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so I combined textile works, a performance piece, a couple of performance pieces, which were exhibited in the exhibition as well.
Yeah, we can actually take a look at some of that work. I know there's pieces where you use the bra, use the petticoat, and you use real material that is symbolic of women and our strife as in the struggle for gender issues and gender equality. But let me also first concentrate on Tip Your Dancer. That particular video. Please tip your dancers, yes. That particular video speaks to so many issues in development, in finance, and like you said, women that are working in the informal sector. Tell us about that particular piece and how you derived the meaning and the messages.
Right. Well, the shoe in itself represents the women that I am addressing in this artwork, women that are working in the clubs or in pole dancing or strip clubs. I worked in a nightclub myself, so I had some kind of first-hand experience meeting and interacting with these women. And the coins that I was playing and pouring into the cup speak to the economic state of the nation. My nation has had its currency devalued up to 4 times, and these are one of the conditions that push women into professions that they may or may not otherwise be in. So I wanted to make a comment on how the state of the economy was affecting women who are marginalized, or women in general, or women in informal sectors. And in the performance, because this is the video version of it, in the performance, I used the same shoe and I'm dressed in a church regalia, and I walk through the audience collecting offering as though I am in church, because one thing that I do in my practice as well is to use radical and alternative material to have a provocative layer that I attach to my work. So I'm constantly trying to push boundaries, to challenge the patriarchal in my society, to challenge myself, and to challenge the power dynamics that I observe in my own life, as well as my society.
That is really powerful, Kresiah. I mean, I'm also drawn to the fact that you chose a conversation with female sex workers. While I was in Uganda, I was fortunate to meet so many of them, and we ran a documentary that we created as an advocacy tool. And I learned that it's just the forces around us that are pushing women to navigate other professions and find a livelihood and find living and support their children and take children to school, make sure children have an education so they are in different professions. There's a power in that. And I think we forget that it is our communities that are creating the forces in like poverty and marginalization and pushing these alternatives to exist. And I know you met with the female sex workers whose stories are being visualized in your work. Tell us about that, and why was it important for you to have these conversations with them before you can represent the work and create such visual?
Well, I just saw it as research, and I didn't want to lie in my work. I wanted a direct conversation where I would ask these women, how they want to be portrayed and how they portray themselves. So the language in my work, the sexual language, is one which you find quite common amongst sex workers and their communities. They take the same language that is used to depower them or shame them, and they use it to mock that same insult or to empower themselves. So in a way, you see that my work may seem to have this erotic layer because it's carrying the voices of women that are exposed to this kind of labor. So I can say, yeah, it was quite interesting. I felt a lot like a sponge, but it's an interesting transition to absorb and then to translate a conversation, an idea, or an expression. And I feel very very privileged to have had an encounter which was so honest, so transparent, and also radical, because these women are very radical themselves in their personalities.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a tough skin that they've had to grow in order for them to manage, I suppose, or to deal with these societal perceptions of themselves to other people. Yeah.
Yeah, that really relates to what Alicia said about being able to get down to the personal, because art has the power in starting conversations and addressing real issues that affect real people. And then as the development community, we pick up on those stories and design programs that can benefit and create change. So let me move to Cynara and Mia. Your work, She Shapes the City, is very powerful in the way you're also fronting women in Nairobi, whose contribution to development is very central in changing the face of the city, but also in improving the lives and the livelihood of their communities. Tell us about She Shapes the City. How did you actualize the process to create this photo series, and why are these subjects important to you?
Thank you, Douglas. It's such a pleasure to be here and be on this platform. And also thank you, Kresiah, for sharing your really beautiful work. It's very compelling. So I'll begin with just talking about She Shapes the City. I'm going to be talking about a couple of projects, and She Shapes the City is obviously very different from Sunday Best at Weekend Studio, but both incorporate empowerment for women.
Yeah.
She Shapes the City was essentially a platform that was created to celebrate women, and it was from all walks of life. So we, and Cynara will be talking a lot about that a little bit later on the specific stories of the different women. But it was essentially a collaboration between myself as a photographer and Cynara, who is a journalist. So my job was to capture the essence and the story through creative portraiture of these celebrated women and women who are winning in society, essentially. And Cynara captured their inspiring stories in both text and audio, for the platform.
Yeah, and I think from a journalist point of view, I've been working in international news organizations and media development for over a decade. And although living in Nairobi is coming across incredible women breaking barriers and boundaries in so many different ways, I wasn't seeing those stories out there through news organizations or media platforms. And it was a real chance to give a spotlight and a platform to women who were already making great impact by themselves, but maybe didn't have the time to shout about it. Or the inclination. What was important for them was making change within their sector and their community.
That's true. There is one derivative that I see in changing the narrative. Oftentimes when we look at the media, the stories that come out of Africa by like Western media platforms are often of just what is wrong and what is going wrong and what areas need to change. But this is sharing positive stories. And you're fronting women whose work is very important. I want to concentrate on, if we can find the slide that has Catherine. because yes, Catherine Wanjahi, I know she's an advocate for sex workers, and it makes me reflect on the conversation that Kresiah's work starts. Tell us about Catherine and her input in this work and why you made her present and made sure that she was seen and heard.
Well, I mean, we opened up the process. It wasn't our choice of the women that we told stories of. We opened up the process for different people to nominate the women that they saw were making change. But why Catherine was nominated by people in her community was, as you say, the work she was doing for sex workers, though she wasn't a sex worker herself. And she came to this work through personal experience. She was in a very prestigious institutional job as a headmistress at a school. And she began to realize when the time ended and school fees were due, that many of the parents were struggling, and particularly the women, she realized, were resorting to sex work to keep their children in education. And this hit her so hard that she decided to leave a very respected job to work with in a sector and with people that maybe were less understood, and so I think that's why her community picked her.
Yeah. Mia, tell us about Sunday Best, because it is also another of those that is within this collection of work. Why Sunday Best? Why the title, and how does it again relate to the kind of ideas that you want to tell? And while you're telling us about this, let us know about your creative process. How do you get to the subjects that you choose?
Sure. So if we could go on to the next slide so people would have, yeah, great. So Sunday Best essentially describes a person who's dressed in their smartest clothing, usually for an occasion such as church. And in Kenya, this elegance on Sundays is absolutely ubiquitous. So one of the thoughts behind it originally was to kind of challenge some of those stereotypes that we see in coming through the news about Africa, which is usually poverty or war. And I wanted to depict, this really beautiful elegance and grace that was, as I said, ubiquitous on Sundays and also on Saturdays, I found out, and through other days of the week within Kenya. So it was a project for me. Weekend Studio is a very different narrative to She Shapes a City, because it's about people essentially walking into this studio and sitting for me and being represented in a way that they choose to be represented. So, for instance, we're looking at Margaret right now, and she became my landlady. So I'll tell you the story a little bit from the beginning so that you understand what it's about. So I happened upon this studio in Kibera. I was looking for a place to photograph some Sunday Best, but I walked into this studio and I met this wonderful old photographer, a guy called David. So it's the previous slide to this. Yeah, exactly. There he is. And David had been running the studio for 37 years. He opened it in 1980. And he had been this portraiture artist. What I didn't realize was that actually what he told me was that 4 days, in 4 days, he was about to close the studio forever, hang up his coat and retire. And I was really quite shocked by this and really saddened, because it felt like it was a legacy of a studio that was about to die. So David then retired and I went off onto an assignment somewhere else in the country, but this really hung with me. And so I called a friend in Kibera who'd been helping me on this project, and I said, what should we do? And we decided that I would just hire the studio to keep it going, to keep this legacy going before we with the object of finding somebody from Kibera to run it and take it over full time. So as we were in this holding pattern, I decided to do this Sunday Best series, and here they are. So this, right here is Sarah. And she was just wonderful to walk into the studio, because she wasn't dressed essentially in the typical Sunday best. She was literally dressed in her football gear, and she was challenging those societal norms and those gender stereotypes just by turning up the way she turned up. And most of my subjects, I would record their life stories. And Sarah, some of the first things that she talked about was, I'll quote her, she says, "People in Kibera, they always say, my dress, my choice. So the way you dress, it doesn't matter with other people." And I felt that this quote really defined the objective of the project. Yeah.
Yes, that's really powerful, but also the fact that you're showing us a different face of Kibera. Those of you that may know, Kibera is one of the largest slums in Nairobi, but here in these images, we are seeing a totally different narrative, and it's really beautiful. And I know you've won some awards for your photography. That is incredible work, and thank you for changing the narrative, but also fronting subjects whose work is important in storytelling.
Thank you.
Let me return that question to Kresiah, in terms of process, in terms of how you arrive at the decisions you make in the subjects that you explore. Tell us about how you got to Mukando, and what subjects you think in general appeal and reflect from the work.
Okay, thank you for that question. Well, I'm disoriented by nature, so I work across different mediums, textile, painting, sculpture, photography, at times performance, and I wouldn't call myself a video artist, and video. And because I'm multifaceted, the most important energy for me is balance. So when I am producing a body of work, I kind of just feel my way through the process. What am I really feeling like doing or playing with? What medium am I feeling like playing with? And that's how I come about to have either a textile exhibition, or at times the ideas intersect. So you find an exhibition carries all facets of my practice. But Mukando shifts between the personal, my own personal struggles, as well as the collective, the women that I encounter in my life. And I try to create a world where these women are powerful, and these women are abstract, because at times when you're less understood in society, you feel a certain oddness that you attach to your body through the way that we are constantly sexualized and verbally abused at times. So that's where kind of this abstract layer in my work comes from. It comes from a state of mind of being a woman and what that means.
Thank you, Kresiah, and sorry about the connection. Mia and Cynara, when you reflect on how women are represented and what stories we often talk about when we're discussing gender issues, where do you think the focus needs to be in addressing gender issues, and how have you been able to capture that in your work?
I think a lot of it's about complexity and nuance. So to not hide away from the challenges that there are, but to understand that there can still be women winning at the same time as women suffering. And to also understand that there are so many different ways that women are winning, and can inspire young girls to have different kinds of lives and different kinds of impact. And And I think one thing I was just reflecting when you were talking about the role of men in all of this is that at one stage we started having men come up to us and say, we want to be part of the campaign. And I think there's something about creating a club that men want to join rather than women trying to always get into the club that men are part of, which I found quite exciting about She Shapes the City.
Yeah. Mia?
Yeah, well, also I feel that a really important part of our project was just, it was almost like the network that we created within She Shapes the City. So it was about essentially women raising women up. So the way we chose our subjects was actually, we didn't choose them at all. We asked women within across industries, ages, experiences, societies to nominate women who they felt were winning within their societies, and we asked them to put them forward, and that's how we featured them, and that was a really beautiful democratic process. But it also meant that we just got such a cross section and such an interesting section of women. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll just speak in reference to one of the aims of my exhibition, which was to shed a bit more light on other aspects of womanhood, because I think we are so often viewed as victims, and we're so often victimized, and we victimize ourselves a lot. But what my work seeks to do is to have this freedom that is radical and that is unapologetic, because I think it is in that kind of attitude that we gain our strength. And attitude is everything, really. When you have a strong mindset, it's very difficult for negativity to bring you down. So that is what my work seeks to do, and that is what I seek to do as an artist, is to bring down these barriers of victimization and negative labeling, and to speak another language that is really carefree, because it's an attitude that I find in this attitude in women who inspire me. So that's what I would say about that.
All right. There's a question for you, Kresiah, that I will return to. Just think about it so that we let Mia and Cynara respond to this question. The question is that, how was your reflection from the reaction to the various audiences to your performance? Think on that. The one where you were in church dressed in regalia. Yes, and Mia and Cynara, in response to the question of what conversations you'd like us to start from your work.
Well, just to follow from what Kresiah was talking about, which was to be unapologetic, I do feel that within my process of photographing, that if I can be unafraid going into it, then quite often my subjects, it can open a space for them to be unafraid too, and for us to kind of rise up to our fullest potential. And hopefully that, that will transcend in the imagery or in the project, towards the end. And, like a big part of what I'd love people to kind of be thinking about would be that, stereotypes are challenged. So whether it be, Eurocentric stereotypes or gender stereotypes or whatever it is, if some light can be shed towards a different viewpoint, then my work achieves its purpose.
Nice. Kresiah, could you speak to the reactions from the audience?
Yes, well, there were different reactions. There so happened to be a, what do you call that tuck shop competition thing where people buy tickets and then they win? So there was a tuck shop, and people were in a run to win stuff. So I did receive some cooking oil. Someone gave me some cooking oil and car keys, Yeah, money, a lot of money was given, and I attached all of these objects to perceptions to say, if you are presented with a woman and she's asking for something from you, what do you give her, or how do you perceive her? So yeah, I received very interesting things because it was also a surprise. I think that element of surprise is what I also enjoy in my work, or that element of discomfort that I make my audience experience, because the topics or the subject themselves itself is quite uncomfortable. So I believe as you're experiencing the work, you need to also have this like really heavy feeling or strange feeling. And I could see this in the faces of the audience. So I would like to believe the piece stayed with them for some time, which is also the intention. And one of the great things about performance is that you leave a lasting impression where people can continue to ponder on what was really transpiring. And I really enjoyed that that observation. Yeah.
Amazing. There's comments coming through. Latonia says this is very informative, a very informative presentation. I love the artwork, beautiful. Rajendra says very touching and inspiring. Thank you for organizing this. Alicia, a question came in for you. How does your background in the arts and creativity help you in your day-to-day work?
Thank you so much, Douglas. I mean, I think that's a good question because for me, I think I've always had a struggle but in terms of cycling between both, right? So on one hand, I want to be figure drawing, I want to be engaged fully in the arts, and then also working in this kind of more technocratic space. And I think it goes back to balance, like what Kresiah was saying. I felt very inspired by that because I think they help even both out, and I think they have very different energies. And then broadly, just thinking about the process of development, one of the things in terms of how we could do things differently, we go out and we talk to all these stakeholders, but do we actually, speak with artists? Do we actually get a very personal view of issues and really, really dig into that nuance and complexity and then incorporate that back into our work? And so I think, I don't see that done as often. And for me, this is an inspiration to think through in a more concrete way, how do we actually engage these communities more meaningfully and consistently throughout the development process? And I think you said, Douglas, no work about us without us, right? And I think I think art is really the umbrella for that framework of how we could change a bit about how we do development in the future.
Thank you very much, Alicia. And yes, to engage in the communities that are going to be affected by the work. I totally appreciate that. And I'm glad the World Bank is taking on initiatives like this. Mia and Cynara, someone says the photos are beautifully staged. How is the process you go through to decide the outfit or headdress? Well, I think I will first respond that you did not decide what the subjects were. They simply turned up in what they were wearing. Yes?
Well, that is certainly correct for Sunday Best at Weekend Studio, for sure. So it was just walk-in clients. Once in a blue moon, I would see someone walking along the street dressed fabulously, and so we would ask them if they wanted to come for a portrait. And there's a picture of Letitia. In particular, she's the lady wearing a pink skirt in this series. And she was quite suspect initially, and so she really had to know, what the project was about and what I was doing. So I explained it all, and she sat for a portrait for me, and she was an extremely empowered lady. Ultimately, I feel that beauty and elegance can be a very empowering thing, as it's confidence of expression, and Letitia embodied that 100%. She then came back for 3 other Sundays, dressed in different Sunday bests, and equally as fabulous and as elegant. She Shapes the City, on the other hand, was a very different process, because obviously we got women to nominate women, but it was a So that's Alicia. That's the picture of her. Yeah, she was fabulous, and I consequently shot her family and lots of just wonderful sequences of her on different Sundays. But She Shapes the City was a very different process. So it was a created fantastical scene where we so in this one in particular, we had the theme of feathers. It was called Take Flight. And what we would do, we would work with a woman designer within Nairobi who would then dress all of the women, and that was very empowering too. So if you were to go down a couple, I think it's after Catherine, so next slide, oh no, sorry, up a couple, so that one, yeah, so that's Teresa. So if you notice, she's got this really amazing headdress around her head. That was actually supposed to be around her neck and shoulders, but as she was putting it around her neck and shoulders, it just looked so beautiful around her head. And she has this incredible life story, which Cynara will take you through at some stage. But I felt that she almost looked like a lioness, and because she had so much courage and her life story was so brave. And then she closed her eyes, and it actually made me want to cry when she did that. And that was the shock, because she just was this beautiful woman, yeah. like a lioness. And so there were different processes. So Weekend Studio was essentially people walking in, and it was the everyday, becoming empowered. Whereas Sunday, She Shapes the City was really winning women who had been selected and were standing in front of us, and it was a created scene. Yeah.
That's amazing, really amazing. I know Cynara, that you two worked together on this particular portraiture. Are there moments during the process that spoke to you the most, working with the women?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said, the She Shapes the City was very high production. So the women would come in, they'd have their makeup done, a local designer would come, dress them up in fabulous clothes, and they would have a very creative process. And then they'd come and sit with me for a long time and just take me through their life story. And so the whole day, we tended to do the whole process within one day, had this amazing energy, because the women met each other and they were working in such different fields that they never would have normally connected. And then we were just kind of putting them on a platform in so many ways. Mia was saying, "You look fabulous, let's create a moment together." I was saying, tell me everything about you. And just that energy of women who had been spending so much time and energy creating amazing impact for their communities, to give it back to them and say, you are special and what you're doing is pretty incredible and you've been nominated. I think that for me created some kind of magic.
Yeah, I see a relationship in how both these artists, the two of you, and in tune with Kresiah, how you, in your working process, you're working with the communities, and there is the personal and these interrelations, because it is through those conversations that the work eventually reflects the subjects that are in conversation. But I want to know from the three of you, are there personal interlinkages with your work? Is there a piece of you that we see in your work? I'll start with you, Kresiah, and then go to you, Cynara and Mia. I'd love to hear from Alicia again, and to like wrap up the talk. So I'll start with you, Chris, on which pieces in your story relate with you personally?
It's very difficult to choose one. I believe there's a piece of me in everything that I create. Fabric is more than just material, it's heritage for me, because it carries an element of a connection that I have with my maternal family. My mother was a dressmaker and a home economics teacher, so she would there was always these handcrafted clothes or or decorations in the living room that were made for her. So I always had this attachment to fabric, particularly soft fabric. And I remember even as a child, I would not fall asleep unless I am holding fabric in my hand. So I'd always have this, I would always cling onto fabric to feel safe and to calm down. So I carried it through my practice, and it's reflected in my textiles. But also, I am a woman who faces a patriarchal society every day, and I am a woman who is a work in progress to societal norms. I do experience of discrimination and labeling, and I address myself in my work. I see myself when I have encounters with other women, and work I find ways to mold these knowledges that we have as women, and the time I use my body to understand or create artwork about myself. So you find that I explore even notions of cultural identity, because this is how I find my balance. As I speak for other women, I speak for myself, but in order for me to speak for myself, I need to understand myself. So I research myself, and as I research the other voices that are in my work. But you'll find that my body is sometimes what I paint, I think, because I see it every day and I am wearing it every day. So I do use my body as a reference to illustrate a certain pose or a certain feeling.
Thank you very much, Kresiah. There is such power in self-advocacy and in sharing personal stories. Over to you, Cynara and Mia. Are there pieces in your work that reflect when you're tackling subjects and issues?
Well, I think She Shapes the City was very personal for me, and I find women who are both strong yet sensitive incredibly inspiring. And I saw through each of those women so much vulnerability and so much hurt, but so much strength and so much humor. And I would walk out of the room after interviews floating on air. I felt so excited to have heard their story. So yeah, I think the campaign made me really proud to be a woman and part of that crew.
Yeah, so I mean, through my photography, I would say that you know, I'm telling the story through my work essentially, and it's totally subjective and an emotional process. Empathy is absolutely key for my work, and I hope that that comes across in the imagery. On a wider sense, if there is empowerment in the recognition of somebody and their story, everybody wants this, everybody wants recognition. And if there's empowerment, there is empowerment of that. And the right to choose how you want to be recognized is just as empowering. And I hope that that came across within Weekend Studio. Yeah.
Really powerful. Alicia and Marina, hearing these stories and being on the front line of discussing art and development and technology and innovation, what speaks to you the most from the work, the incredible work that these artists have created, and why is it important for us to continue engagement with art?
Thank you so much, Douglas. I kind of wanted to flip the question, if it's okay with you, just so that we're centering the artists, because I think I view my role as a bit of a connector in this, right? And so, what I wanted to ask Kresiah, Mia, and Cynara is, as you work towards social change with your art and what you're, in terms of what you're doing, what is your vision for how we could do social change differently, right? Like, what would your advice be to us who, as policymakers or researchers, are working at this big global level? But, based on what you see in your communities, what advice would you have for us for the change that you would like to see?
Yeah, sorry, it's kind of blinking. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Did you hear us okay?
Yeah, I
Okay.
can hear you. I have only one thing to say, give space. I think that's where we are most free and most seen and most heard. So just give us space.
Yeah. Cynara and Mia. And that's important, Kresiah, because again, sorry, that artists struggle finding spaces and partners and support to get our work within the audiences that need to see it. So that's a very powerful statement, Kresiah. Cynara? Mia?
I would just say recognition for the work that's already been done by so many women in so many places that is so impactful. And to start with supporting that before coming up with huge new ideas, because as just as there are such significant challenges, there are such great triumphs that are happening. Of them is very powerful.
Yeah.
And if we could, if we can take it down to, just the individual level, and if people can really look inward to themselves and challenge, their own stereotypes in life, then I feel that, there's effect being done.
All right.
And if I may, first of all, I connect completely what Cynara was saying, that you felt proud to be a woman working with these extraordinary individuals that were part of She Shaped the City. I can say I feel proud to be a human being when I work with artists, because forget every possible aspect that any human being can bring of negativity, but artists are really, to me, the most extraordinary individuals. They are courageous, they are breaking the ground for many of us, and they help us think differently. And mostly, among all the artists I met around the world, they are incredible sensitive barometers of realities around them. And what I was mentioning at the beginning, that they can talk in a universal language and they can talk to the emotional intelligence of people. That I think is crucial. And I've seen in my work at the bank over the years, although naturally our institution is set in a different way, but slowly people started to understand that the voice of artists is fundamental, or the voice of art is fundamental to pass certain messages. To give you an example, we have the spring meetings coming up, which are the most important meetings together with the annual meetings for the World Bank. And the request for contact with artists to convey some part of the messages is constant. I was following the talk, and in the meantime, I was bombarded with people saying, "Oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to do that." I mean, calls from the bank, as Alicia can testify, this is a very technocratic institution. So having this kind of, process through which many of our colleagues have gone through and recognizing the importance of artists is really extraordinary, and really kudos go to all of you who are bring your soul in all of the things you are doing. So thank you deeply. And thank you to Alicia, who is like me, heretic.
And thanks to you, Marina, you've been, pushing the boundaries and encouraging all of us to be courageous in what you do and really incorporate this into our work. So kudos to you as well.
Thank you very much to both of you. Cynara, Mia, and Kresiah, your work is incredible. I am moved just learning the stories behind your work, the impact that you're doing, but also being able to directly affect women, discussing real issues. That is very important. So congratulations on the great work. I encourage each of us who's here to go up on the social media links and look at the artists' work, engage more, email them, have conversations. Let us talk more about art and find out how else we can continue. And yes, we should know that we can all do more. The men on this conversation, on this space, we can do more. It is the support. It goes such a long way in enabling us to have these conversations, but also not say that we are giving women voice because they have a voice. We are supporting their voices and making sure that we all engage in the needs and support a future for gender equality. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an honor. We hope to see you again. We have another talk on 25th of March. We encourage you to join us again, and such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Douglas.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
You will see the work of these beautiful artists in the virtual exhibition that will open in April. So for the bank colleagues and the people outside, please stay tuned. Thank you, and thank you really very, very much to all of you.
Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.